jury's decision must have saved them hours and hours a day in shooting time and saved them plenty of money that they could keep adding to Raymond Burr's well-deserved salary increases every year. Donald Trump, who grew up on Perry Mason, is now asking for one of those fake Perry Mason hearings in the Manhattan criminal case against him for making hush money payments to adult film star Stormy Daniels. The case is now in the discovery phase, with prosecutors having handed over all of their evidence to Donald Trump's criminal defense lawyers. The next significant proceeding in the case is the trial, currently scheduled for March 4th of 2024. But Donald Trump is asking for what his lawyers call an evidentiary hearing in the case to consider whether the case should be dismissed, which is District Attorney Alvin Bragg opposed in a motion filed today. The district attorney's filing says that Donald Trump seems to believe, quote, the ordinary rules for criminal law and procedure should be applied differently here. Courts have repeatedly rejected defendants' demands for special treatment and instead have adhered to the core principle that the rule of law applies equally to the powerful as to the powerless. This prosecution should proceed to trial. In his filing today, District Attorney Bragg described the case this way. Defendant Donald J. Trump is charged with 34 felony counts of falsifying business records in the first degree as part of an expansive and corrupt criminal scheme to conceal damaging information from the voting public in advance of the 2016 presidential election. And in Georgia today, as expected, Judge Scott McAfee issued a protective order controlling the handling of prosecution evidence given to defendants in the case of Georgia versus Donald Trump and multiple co-defendants, as was agreed to in an emergency hearing yesterday by prosecutors and most of the defense counsel. Prosecutors will label as sensitive material the evidence that should be subject to the protective order. The ruling comes after at least one defense lawyer in the case leaked video recordings of prosecution interviews with 4 of the co-defendants in the case who have pleaded guilty. One criminal defense lawyer, Jonathan Miller, representing co-defendant Misty Hampton, admitted in court yesterday that he leaked the video evidence to reporters. That does not mean that he was the only criminal defense lawyer who leaked that evidence. The lawyer said he leaked the video evidence because he thought some of it was helpful to his client. In Judge McAfee's order today, the judge described the possible effects of such leaks on potential jurors. Potential jurors should be limited from exposure to materials that may be deemed inadmissible at trial. One party may believe a piece of evidence should be considered by the public at large, while another finds it prejudicial and damaging to the jury pool. The court has an interest in ensuring that all parties retain their right to a fair trial before an unbiased jury, a process that could become unattainable should the public be allowed to vet every piece of unfiltered evidence months before trial. Joining our discussion now is Glenn Kirshner, a former federal prosecutor and host of the Justice Matters podcast, and Barbara McQuaid, former U.S. attorney and law professor at the University of Michigan Law School. She is co-host of the podcast Sisters in Law. Both are MSNBC legal analysts. And Glenn Kirshner, Perry Mason is on my local cable system at 11:30 p.m. Every weeknight, so that's what I do after work. And the absence of the juries is really, really funny when you actually notice it. And there's always this line about, oh, it's just a hearing, it's just a pretrial hearing, completely fake, of course. But that seems to be what Donald Trump is dreaming of in the Manhattan case.
Donald Trump seems to want a trial before his trial starts, which is an unusual procedure. And, you know, as I was working my way through the fairly lengthy court filing in the Manhattan District Attorney's case, I was really thrilled to see that the way they are framing this case is that, you know, this case is about an illegal conspiracy to undermine the 2016 presidential election. Now, the charges are falsifying business records, and one might observe, you know, there are probably plenty of business people in New York who may be falsifying business records. But whereas, some people might commit that offense to cheat on their taxes, Donald Trump was committing that offense to cheat in a presidential election. And why that's so important, Lawrence, is because motive can be so important to a jury. Motive is almost never an element of a crime that prosecutors have to prove, with a couple of exceptions, like in the hate crimes arena. But boy, really good motive can move the needle for the jurors in a way that the actual evidence of the commission of the crime sometimes can't. And Donald Trump's motive was basically to steal the 2016 election.
Yeah, and Barbara, that is exactly what the federal prosecutors presented in the Michael Cohen prosecution for these same payments, was that this was, they said, a conspiracy against the United States and against American voters.
Yes, and that's what really is driving this prosecution. The falsification of the business records were really to cover for the hush money payments. They were sort of laundered through Michael Cohen's shell company and then written off as legal fees. But they also grossed up the numbers, as alleged in the indictment, so that Michael Cohen would get extra money because he would have to pay taxes on this money that wasn't really income. And so there's a scheme to commit tax fraud. There's a scheme to commit state and federal election fraud. And it was all facilitated by these false entries, according to the prosecution's theory of the case. And to your Perry Mason point, Lawrence, you're absolutely right. What Donald Trump is asking for is an evidentiary hearing that previews the evidence. The facts are for a jury to decide. And so in this case, they are going to have to cast that jury no matter what it costs.
And Barbara, we now have the protective order officially entered into the record in Georgia, as you suggested would have to happen after those videos were leaked.
Yeah, no surprise. The only surprise here is that this protective order wasn't entered earlier. The horse has probably kind of already left the barn, and now they're closing the barn door. But better that the barn door get closed now before anything else leaks out, because of two threats. One, the one the judge identified about tainting the potential jury pool, but also about intimidation of witnesses. In this political climate where we've seen threats against prosecutors and judges, these witnesses don't need threats or harassment to themselves either. And so protective orders can prevent that.
Let's hold it there. We're going to squeeze in a commercial break. And when we come back, talk about what happened with Donald Trump's favorite judge in Florida, Judge Aileen Mercedes Cannon, who Donald Trump appointed to the bench. She did him another favor today. We'll cover that when we come back. Donald Trump's favorite judge, federal judge Aileen Mercedes Cannon, who was appointed by Donald Trump, once again today denied a standard motion by Special Prosecutor Jack Smith and found another way to potentially delay Donald Trump's trial for criminal possession of government documents, including classified documents. Jack Smith had asked the court to set a deadline for Trump lawyers to identify which classified documents they intend to refer to in court when the case goes to trial. Jack Smith's motion said that Donald Trump's criminal defense lawyers have full access to all the documents in the case and should now be able to tell the judge and the prosecutors, quote, which documents or pieces of information from these 5,000 pages or from any other source they reasonably expect to disclose at trial. Providing such notice by a set near-term date will facilitate the completion of Classified Information Procedures Act litigation before the May 20th, 2024 trial date. In Judge Cannon's response, she said that no such deadline will be set until a scheduling conference that she has already scheduled for March 1st, 2024. Back with us, Glenn Kirshner and Barbara McQuaid. Glenn, what does that delay of that decision mean to that case?
It means that Judge Cannon seems entirely willing to just sort of casually and cavalierly let the May trial date slip. I actually think it's pretty outrageous that she would say, I'm not even going to set this deadline until we meet again on March 1st. It feels like that all but guarantees the May trial date will slip. Now, hopefully, Lawrence, that will become sort of an academic issue at that point, because as we all know, in Washington, D.C., The trial is scheduled to begin on March 4th. And actually, jurors are coming in on February 9th to begin filling out jury questionnaires. So I do think if the D.C. trial kicks off on March 4th, or it looks like it will kick off on March 4th, then on March 1st, they will all get together and probably end up picking a new trial date in the Florida documents case.
Barbara McQuaid, this just is one of the many examples of the countless ways in which a judge in routine decisions, seemingly routine decisions, can delay and delay and delay.
Yes, and, there's nothing illegal about what she did. It is a matter of discretion. But by refusing to set this deadline, she is necessarily building in delay that will push back that trial date, because setting this date for notice is just the first step of the litigation that will follow. And so, necessarily, if this doesn't happen, it isn't even set until March, it's just not going to be resolved before that trial date. And so I think incrementally, whether deliberately or not, this judge is giving a lot of benefits to Donald Trump.
Glenn Kirshner and Barbara McQuaid, thank you both very much for joining our discussion tonight.
Thank you.
Thank you. Coming up, today, the Washington Post published crime scene photographs from some of America's mass murderers and the damage done by AR-15 assault rifles. Our next guest is a former... We are all here thanks to the miraculous work that our mothers did in the 9 months that it took to bring us into this world. But Donald Trump says 9 months isn't nearly enough time to prepare a criminal defense in any of the criminal cases pending against him. But in the last 8.5 months, the Republican-controlled House Ethics Committee authorized 37 subpoenas and obtained and studied over 172,000 pages of documents. It conducted an investigation that was so thorough. It found even more crimes committed by George Santos than federal prosecutors have already charged him with. Today, the House Ethics Committee agreed to, quote, publicly condemn Representative Santos for his conduct. It took the House Ethics Committee only 9 months to conclude, in writing as it did today, George Santos cannot be trusted. The House Ethics Committee is chaired by Republican Michael Guest of Mississippi. It is the only committee in the House that is equally divided between Republicans and Democrats. All 5 of the Republicans on the House Ethics Committee found absolutely nothing wrong with what Donald Trump did leading up to and on January 6th, that every one of those Republicans voted against the impeachment of Donald Trump for his part in the attack on the Capitol, which included Donald Trump's dereliction of duty, including taking absolutely no action at all to stop that attack. All 5 of the Republicans on the House Ethics Committee thought Donald Trump did nothing wrong on January 6th. Some of the Republican members of the House Ethics Committee denied the actual results of the presidential election and voted to block the inauguration of President Joe Biden. But even those election-denying and January 6th truth-denying Republicans could not abide George Santos using campaign money for Botox. Today, the House Ethics Committee released the investigative report prepared by a subcommittee of the Ethics Committee. It is a congressional document that reads like something from the pre-Trump era, which is to say it reads as if prepared by perfectly rational fact finders. The House Ethics Committee cover memo to Congress that made the investigative report public says Representative Santos sought to fraudulently exploit every aspect of his House candidacy for his own personal financial profit. He blatantly stole from his campaign. He deceived donors into providing what they thought were contributions to his campaign, but were in fact payments for his personal benefit. He reported fictitious loans to his political committees to induce donors and party committees to make further contributions to his campaign, and then diverted more campaign money to himself as purported repayments of those fictitious loans. He used his connections to high-value donors and other political campaigns to obtain additional funds for himself through fraudulent or otherwise questionable business dealings. And he sustained all of this through a constant series of lies to his constituents, donors, and staff about his background and experience. The subcommittee report lists thousands of dollars spent on a range of purchases and on cosmetic procedures, including an awful lot of Botox, along with $6,000 on luxury goods from the Italian designer brand Ferragamo, and hundreds of dollars in ATM withdrawals, including $800 in cash from an ATM at a casino. Congressman Santos did not dispute one word of the report today, not one word, but he still called it a disgusting, politicized smear. And George Santos finally said what Republicans have been hoping he would say. I will continue on my mission to serve my constituents up until I am allowed. I will, however, not be seeking re-election for a second term in 2024. It is possible that at this time tomorrow night, George Santos will no longer be a member of the House of Representatives. After the Ethics Committee report was released today, the chairman of the Ethics Committee, Michael Guest, who voted to overturn the results of the presidential election and who voted against Donald Trump's impeachment for what federal prosecutors now say were crimes on January 6th, announced through his spokesperson that he will introduce a resolution to expel Congressman Santos from the House of Representatives tomorrow. The Ethics Committee investigation of George Santos is unlike anything we have seen Republicans in the House of Representatives do in the Trump era. And that makes it something of a marvel. It is astonishing to see members of the House of Representatives who denied the presidential election and denied that Donald Trump committed impeachable offenses on January 6th, including dereliction of duty. It is simply astounding to see those same Republican members of the House lend their names to such a thorough and professional piece of work as this Ethics Committee investigation, which, in fairness, was not really conducted by the Republican members of the committee. These investigations are conducted almost entirely by staff, but still, the Republican staff of other committees are doing absolutely terrible work, shameful work. This Ethics Committee investigation report is the only evidence there is of any professionalism and competence on the Republican side of the House of Representatives. And the reason Republicans produced this impressive investigative report, and it is a unanimous report with the full support of the Democrats on the committee, but the reasons the Republicans did it, the reason they did it is because no House Republican fears George Santos the way they all fear Donald Trump. And every House Republican knows that George Santos hurts their campaign to maintain control of the House of Representatives. Every House Republican knows that it would be very bad for the Republican Party to be associated with George Santos on Election Day when they know they will all be happily associated with the Republican nominee for president who has been indicted 4 times. Every one of those Republican members of the House Ethics Committee who condemned George Santos today will be cheering for their indicted nominee at their next convention. And so I, for one, just don't know what to make of this House Ethics Committee investigative report. Does it mean that when the Trump era is finally over, that Republicans in Congress would be able to return to the way they used to mostly conduct themselves in the House and in the Senate? Is this House Ethics Committee report evidence that congressional Republicans are not as crazy as they claim to be, and that without Donald Trump controlling their behavior, they could actually return to what Congress, at least, considers normal? For the answer to that question and others, joining us now is Democratic Congressman Glenn Ivey of Maryland. He's a member of the House Ethics Committee and the House Judiciary Committee. He is also a former federal prosecutor. Congressman Ivey, thank you very, very much for joining us tonight. And I want to stress to the audience, this is a unanimous report. All 5 Democrats on the committee, including yourself, all 5 Republicans on the committee agree with every word of this report. But Congressman Ivey, can you understand my astonishment at this, that the Republican side of the House of Representatives was capable of participating in an investigation as thorough, complete, professional, and bipartisan as this one?
Well, yeah, I mean, I appreciate your comments, and I thought you were right on the money on a couple of those in particular. Certainly the staff role, I think, was absolutely critical. And as you were talking about it, I was trying to think, well, which staff members are the Democrats and which are the Republicans? And I'm not really sure. And I think that may be a strong indication of what you can do when you've got a bipartisan effort going forward. And as you said, they really did do an outstanding job. And, to be fair, I think as well, the political analysis you made is right on the money as well. I mean, they certainly don't fear George Santos. I think he's viewed as an albatross around their neck, certainly for the New York Republicans, who are really have been pushing to try and get him expelled for some time now. So I think you're right on both counts. The big question will be, when one of these votes finally comes to the floor again. We had 182 Republicans that voted no on the last expulsion vote. You're going to have to over 100 of those plus will have to shift from no to yes in order to actually hit the 2/3 number to expel him. Is that going to happen? And the critical factor they're going to have to balance out is, you're right about the impact he could have on their election coming up. But the other factor, though, is that makes their margin even smaller for the House majority. So we'll have to see how they sort that out. House leadership, I think, is still remaining silent on what position they're going to take on this. So we'll just have to see.
What the report indicates that you found potential crimes that federal prosecutors apparently either have not found or have not yet charged George Santos with. What are those potential crimes?
Well, they touch on a number of different aspects, mostly on reporting. And so it may be that the Department of Justice looked at them and decided that they weren't necessarily big enough for them to include in their case, or they wanted to streamline their case. We're not exactly sure. But the staff broke out a chart for them so that they would know which ones we thought were beyond the scope of the indictment that they'd already brought. It's the 23-count superseding indictment I think you mentioned earlier. And so we'll have to see if they add those. But even if they don't, I mean, I think, the allegations in the indictment, which we corroborated, we had over 40 witnesses were interviewed. I think it's like 170,000 plus pages of documents that they reviewed. And it's strong documentary evidence, too. It goes to the bank records and the campaign finance records that came from the reports. And we use those to put together the money trail. It's a very strong case that doesn't allow that much on witness credibility. And I think that's going to be a major I hope that'll be a major factor when House members evaluate this and make their decision when the vote arises.
And, of course, as is standard in these Ethics Committee investigations, you offered George Santos more than one opportunity to defend himself in whatever way he wanted to, either by submitting evidence to you that could be documentary evidence that could be helpful to him, or to provide testimony to you. And apparently he did not respond to any of the invitations for him to supply information to the committee.
Yeah, his lawyer communicated with the staff, but, from the standpoint of actually having a chance to give him the opportunity to sit down and explain, if he, felt that he had good explanations, are we off track, or we misunderstanding something? Is there some innocent explanation. He failed to do that. Now, he did plenty of television interviews about this, so, we knew that he would be willing to talk about it, at least in certain contexts. But as far as coming in and giving us a deposition or a transcript or a transcribed interview, he declined to do that.
How would you describe the way the committee worked? You had several meetings, about once a month at least, on this to go through it as members, as the staff was developing the investigative material. So you were frequently, I assume, in the room together as committee members. How would you describe the functioning of this bipartisan committee?
I thought it worked extremely well. So the committee created a subcommittee consistent with the ethics rules in the House of 4 members. I was part of the subcommittee that did some of this work as well. And then we worked with the staff closely as they went through their investigation. A key point to point out here, I think, is that, obviously the Department of Justice had an investigation and then a prosecution going at the same time. We made sure that the staff and the DOJ attorneys were in communications. We wanted to make sure we didn't do anything to preempt or step on their investigation or create any problems. And that's, in fact, one of the reasons we wrapped it up as quickly as we did, was to make sure we really didn't want to get in the way of them moving forward with the criminal case that they're moving forward with.
Just before we go, as I read this, my imagining of those committee meetings was not a single tense moment between you and Republican members. It reads as the way these things used to work.
It was interesting. I won't go into the particulars of the deliberations, but I'll say this. There were certainly times where, I, as a liberal Democrat, was in agreement with a conservative Republican, and we might have had the other Democrat and Republican, disagreeing with the two of us. So it wasn't partisan. Frequently the divisions went in different directions. That ended up being the case when we got back to the full committee, too. So, it's the way it used to be, as you pointed out. I first became a Hill staffer in 1987 for Congressman John Conyers. That was how it used to be. It'd be nice to get back to that, at least on a more frequent basis. We know it's not constant, but just looking ahead at what's coming in the near future in the House, I think that's unlikely. So hope springs eternal, though. We'll see.
Congressman Glenn Ivey, thank you very much for joining us tonight.
Thank you.
And joining us now is Democratic Congressman Robert Garcia of California. He's a member of the House Oversight Committee and House Homeland Security Committee. And Congressman Garcia, in my memory, you are the first in the House of Representatives, it feels like a year ago, calling for George Santos to be expelled.
That's right. I mean, in fact, it's been now 9 months since we actually first filed those first initial expulsion resolution papers on the House floor. And it's been 9 months since Republicans unanimously essentially voted to save Santos and keep him in office, and then referred this matter to the Ethics Committee. And now we actually finally have the results. I mean, what we have in front of us, besides the fact that we knew he was already a fraud and a liar 9 months ago, it's even more damning what's in this report. Spending all of this essential campaign slush fund that he created from his donors on Botox, on shopping at Sephora, at Ferragamo, at Hermès is it's scandalous. It's shameful, and I hope that the Republicans this time will do what they were unwilling to do last time, and that is actually expel this fraudster and liar from Congress.
One of the things that's quite striking about this is how well the Ethics Committee worked, because I have to say, when this was first referred to the Ethics Committee, we are now accustomed to the Ethics Committee being the place where these things go to, if not die, languish for years without action. I did not expect action from that committee. What turns out to be now less than 9 months.
Well, I think that's right. I mean, look, I remember when Kevin McCarthy, I had communicated and written a letter to Kevin McCarthy early on, and we were trying to expel George Santos early on, and he had already admitted to actually one case of fraud in Brazil. Obviously, now with 23 different counts against him. And we essentially were getting the runaround, and we thought this would not actually never conclude. And that's why there have been other efforts to try to expel George Santos, because this was going nowhere. And I'm glad that that initial effort led to this report. I'm glad that the report is out. But we knew 9 months ago that he shouldn't be in Congress. I think this seals the deal. we are going to get the 2/3. I've been talking and been communicating with other Republicans and Democrats that voted to keep Santos on this last effort. We're going to expel him. And if he should do the right thing, save himself the trouble, and resign tonight.
When do you expect the vote on expelling?
Well, there's we had announced that we were going to put forward another expulsion set of papers on the first day that we're back, which, of course, is right after Thanksgiving. And we, of course, got word today that Republicans are going to do the same thing, which is great. I mean, Republicans are finally on board, so we're glad that they're doing that. I imagine that this vote is going to happen the week after Thanksgiving, could be Tuesday, could be Wednesday. That'll be set by the Speaker, who, by the way, has not taken a formal position on this yet, and he should. He's been pushing his members to vote for expulsion. And one way or another, we are going to get rid of George Santos from the House. He just does not deserve to be there, and he'll have his day in court with his 23 other counts. But we have a different standard in Congress. It's not a court of law, and we have the ability to remove him, and that's what we should do.
Congressman Robert Garcia, thank you very much for joining us tonight.
Thanks, Lawrence.
And when we come back, Donald Trump is asking for one of those fake hearings from America's first TV lawyer show, Perry Mason. That's next. Donald Trump is so old, he is older than television. Donald Trump was born before television. But by the time he was 11 years old, through his teenage years, he got to watch Perry Mason from 1957 to 1966, starring Raymond Burr in American television's very first lawyer show. It was the big drama on TV in those days. Black and white, classic old TV. And one odd thing that it might take a while to notice when you watch reruns of old Perry Mason shows now, as I do, is that there is usually no jury in the courtroom. The writers justified that early in the series when they decided to stop using juries by having one of the lawyers involved refer to what was happening in court as a pre-trial hearing, or sometimes the judge would do that, without ever specifying why all the witnesses were testifying at a pre-trial hearing that sure seemed like a trial. The reason there were no juries in Perry Mason's courtroom was to save money and time in shooting the show. And when you're shooting a TV series, saving time is money. The producers figured out